Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. On today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this television. This is a Sampo model number 7713, and it's from October of 1979. The brand Sampo, which is actually one that I wasn't really familiar with until someone gave me this TV, is a Taiwanese company that I think around the time of this TV in the late 70s was just really getting into the market in North America, importing their televisions here for sale against or alongside the domestic TVs, Zenith, RCA, stuff like that. Being a 13-inch model, this is going to be a lower cost bedroom type television. I'm sure there were plenty of people who use this as their main television, maybe in their small apartment, but I think most people had a larger TV in the living room, and then they would relegate stuff like this to a kitchen or bedrooms, things like that. Or potentially for your kid to plug in something like your Atari 800 line of computer or your TRS-80 color computer, which you had got, and this being a color TV is a perfect fit for those types of things. Now, I have no idea if this TV works. It was given to me in a completely unknown state, so I just want to take a look at this thing first, and then we will open it up, take a look inside, see if anything looks completely blown up or out of the ordinary, and if everything looks good, then we'll fire this thing up and see if it works. If it doesn't, of course, then I'll try to do a repair. Pretty sure I don't have any access to schematics and whatnot for this. Maybe there's a Sam's PhotoFax I can get, but I think we'll be operating blind. But being a solid state TV from this era, it should be pretty easy to work on. And well, yeah, I should be able to figure out even without schematics. So the case on this, totally plastic. It's got some shiny chrome type paint along the front, but it's nothing on the front that's actually metal. It's just painted plastic. Being that this is from the late 70s, the CRT is the type without the tinted glass, and therefore the phosphor is quite light gray, so you don't have the best contrast ratio in rooms that have a lot of ambient light, like down here in the basement. Along the bottom edge of the set, we have 3 controls that are exposed: vertical hold, looks like brightness and color. On this corner, there is a headphone jack for private listening. There is the single monaural speaker with the Sampo logo, the indicator to tell you that this is indeed a color television. And then we have the controls for tint, picture, or contrast, or white level, and a pull-on volume / power switch. So you pull on and off to turn the set on and off, and then this is also the volume control. At the top, there's something that says ACT. I don't know what that could stand for. Automatic color temperature. The button is a little bit wobbly. It feels like something is actually kind of broken on this. I assume it wouldn't have been like this from the factory, but it does seem to work and doesn't fall out of the set. There's a UHF and VHF tuner. I don't know about the fine tuning. It feels a bit loose, so that might actually be broken. There would be a little plastic gear that connects this ring into the tuner. And the fact that that just turns so freely, I'm not sure about that. And this lower control is for VHF. And oddly enough, the fine tuning control doesn't seem to work at all. Yeah, not sure about that. It just turns that much and then stops, and I don't want to force it. Top of the set and the sides has this wood grain, and it does have a little pop-out handle because this is supposed to be a quote-unquote portable set. But believe it or not, this thing is really heavy, much more than you would think for something this size. So I assume there's a good amount of metal structure inside the case that adds a lot of weight to this. And it wasn't unusual in the 70s to see stickers like this, wood grain finish. Like, why is that there? It's a sticker too. I could see it saying simulated wood grain, but it just says wood grain finish. And this is just pure plastic. So that side doesn't have anything on it, and this side is just completely devoid of anything as well. Now on the back, let's see, the power cord is just wrapped up around the aerial here. Okay, so we have 2 VHF antennas. The top one is completely snapped off, and the lower one is also, well, it's missing its little pull-out part, so you can't actually extend it. There also appears to be a UHF loop, which conveniently folds down around the neck of the CRT. It's kind of a clever design, I suppose, although it doesn't really pivot very much, so you probably don't get a lot of adjustability there. Super common for these days, this television has screw terminals for both the VHF and the UHF, and these little wires come out of the set are actually just the connections to the VHF and the UHF antennas. So if you want to disconnect these and use external antenna, for instance on your roof, or a TV switch box for your game console or computer, you would disconnect these from the actual screw terminals attached to the little switch box or external devices, and you would just leave these hanging. There's Sampo Corporation of America's address in Elk Grove, Illinois. That's outside of Chicago. There's not a whole lot on Sampo on Wikipedia, although it does say that they still exist. They have a website. We'll look at that in a second. It looks like Sampo had a joint venture with Sony, but also Sharp from 1967 onward. And it was with Sharp to manufacture color televisions. So it's quite possible that Sharp, which is a Japanese company, has something to do with the manufacture of this television. And Sampo today makes all the usual stuff you'd imagine a company like it would make. Flat screen TVs, air conditioners, fridges, washing machines, coffee makers. I bet if any of my viewers watching are from Southeast Asia, they probably are familiar with the modern version of Sampo. But I have to say, in North America, I don't think I've ever seen a Sampo product other than some old televisions back from this era. Chassis is CS13A. That would help if you were looking for schematics, for instance. Often these companies would use the same chassis on a bunch of different sets with different features, and they would all have that same chassis number, even though the model number might be different. Now on the back of the set, there are some controls that are exposed through screw holes. That is the focus control, so that probably goes through onto the flyback. And down at the bottom, it looks like we have V linearity, V size, horizontal hold, and that one isn't labeled. I'm not sure if it goes all the way through or not. As is so typical with these sets, they did include some wire management for the power cord, but one side is broken off, so you cannot actually use it anymore. There's the plug if anyone is interested. It's a little bent up, but that is understandable for the age. Taya, it says on there, T-A-Y-A. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take the back cover off so we can look inside. I imagine it's gonna be very dusty. There's a ton of dust that was on the outside of this that I've wiped off when I got it, but inside these screw holes for the various controls there, it's very dirty. So the screws, which go into plastic, are really, really stuck in there. Well, at least that first one was. That one was a bit easier to take out. A lot of times there are screws on the bottom edge, so I'm just gonna turn the whole TV on its side. All right, so yeah, there's a screw there and a screw there. There was a little bit of a crack when I first turned this screw. I highly doubt this set has ever been worked on before. It was pretty common that sets like this, Sampo branded and other things, were generally considered cheap and junky. And I'm not sure the reason for that, because from my understanding, it seems that sets like this made in Southeast Asia and in East Asia were really, really reliable and almost always still work perfectly. So it seemed that people were just equating the fact that they were inexpensive compared to the domestic TVs, but they weren't built to an inferior build quality standard. It didn't seem like they were, at least. And when it comes to these things working in 2025, it feels like the ones that are made like by Sampo and stuff are more likely to work than something that was domestic like Zenith or RCA. Okay, so I was able to pull the back cover away from the front and we are exposed to the PCB. We can see there's some transistors there. And don't worry about high voltage, by the way, on this set. I have never plugged this in and I've had this sitting in the basement for a couple years now. But I have to give the usual warning. Things like mains connected devices can be really dangerous inside because there can be capacitors that hold a charge even when they're unplugged and turned off. Not to mention, of course, the CRT itself is a big capacitor and it holds a charge. So just be very careful and make sure you don't open these unless you know exactly what you're doing and you know how to do it safely. And it goes without saying that when this TV is plugged in the wall, there's a good chance that this is a hot chassis set. That just means the power supply regulation on this is not using a switch mode isolated power supply. It's simply converting the AC into DC and then using some bleed resistors and a pass transistor to bring the voltage down to the correct B+ voltage. And that means the hot pin on this polarized plug, which just happens to be the smaller one, is connected into the parts of the TV that generate the voltage. And the larger pin, which is neutral, is connected to the chassis ground, so to speak. But if someone has switched this power cord out and they put, say, the wrong cord on, or they put the polarity on the wrong way, or they've replaced it with a non-polarized plug, or your wall socket is non-polarized or incorrectly wired, then it's quite possible that the chassis ground in here, which is metal stuff inside the set, like around the board here, could be live at mains voltage. And in North America, it's super duper common that televisions like this are hot chassis because 13-inch TVs like this don't need generally B+ is higher than like 160 volts or so, and that is easily attainable with our 120 volts in North America when you're doing the DC conversion and the bleed resistor and stuff like that. Right now, I think what's happening is there's some connections from the tuner to this back panel where these screws are that I have to figure out how to disconnect. And going handheld, I can just show you what I'm talking about. So these wires come from the tuners. These are some twin lead wires that seem to be connected to the back panel still. All right, hopefully that is visible. Sorry for the shaky cam. Looks like they're just connected with push-on spade terminals. So I just need to pull those off so I can get the back cover off. They just pull off with spade terminals, no problem. There we go. Okay, first things first, we can see the connections that go from the built-in antennas on the back cover to those screw terminal holes, well, the holes that feed them out so I can screw them into the screw terminals. Does look like we have, it's not quite a schematic, but at least there is a sticker that shows the components and their location on the board. That's kind of handy. I'm going to clean this up and take a high-res photo of it so we can look at that blown up. Okay, so taking a look at the inside here on the bottom of the PCB, things look good. We don't see any obvious destruction, you know, no big burn marks, at least not on first appearance. Now we can see that we have ICs. I mean, 1979, it makes sense. Color demodulation, IF, that kind of stuff is going to be all in ICs. So I see 4 ICs on here. In fact, there might be another one under this little cover here. I don't think you can see that very well. Let's turn this a little. There's a metal cover. Might have another IC under there. This is probably for IF, intermediate frequency. So that's conversion from what comes out of the tuner into a composite video signal to run the rest of the set. Now, I know people are going to be asking me right off the bat, hey, can we easily just composite mod this or say RGB in? Not really, because again, live chassis, that means this metal right here that I'm touching could easily be at 120 volts if you connect the wire wrong. And what's hooked up to this? Well, everything that's grounded on here. So when you hook up composite video, you're hooking up a ground and a video signal, right? That would go into this motherboard or into this circuit board somewhere. Well, if this is plugged in wrong or your outlet is wrong, then all of a sudden the ground shield on your RCA cable will be live at 120 volts. That is super duper dangerous because you're relying on a polarized plug and potentially a ground fault interrupter outlet as like your only protection. And not everyone has those. And like I said, this power cord could be hooked up wrong. There are a lot of issues with that. So I would really recommend not, and I repeat, not trying to do composite mod on a set like this. Now, when it comes to the operation of this set, of course, we have to worry about the fact that we have bad solder joints. I haven't really given this a close inspection, but things look fine. All the connections, at least on first appearance, are shiny and they look nice. What can happen is sometimes the solder joints can start to oxidize, and I'm not sure if that makes them more prone to cracking or breaking, but I don't really see that on this set. There's certainly some dust under here and whatnot. Also, this is interesting. Take a look at this. This is a single capacitor, C705, single electrolytic, but it actually has 3 different electrolytic caps inside, and on the outside of it, we can look at it and we'll see that they have different values. So if you were going to replace this cap, you'd have to get creative and mount 3 actual capacitors to replace this one. That's kind of an old school way of doing it, and I really don't think you can buy these types of caps anymore. But knowing this set is from 1979, it probably wasn't used a whole lot since it's a bedroom type TV, means that cap's probably fine. Bad solder joints on these still could be possible, so I really do need to kind of look closely, at least at the larger components like the flyback, and check for good connections, because those connections alone, those bad connections alone, could keep a set like this from working. Not to mention, it's entirely possible that a bad connection somewhere could actually damage something if we switch the set on while it's in a broken state. I spent a few minutes with a loop and a flashlight looking for bad or cracked solder joints, and I did find a few. They were just on the connectors. So I just spent a moment to go and reflow all of the connectors that go onto the PCB. I don't think any of these were a problem. They weren't bad, but just trying to be safe. There's the inside of the set. You can see that we do have that type of power supply I was talking about, so it's definitely 100% this is a live chassis. No switch mode power supply to be seen on this set at all. Almost certainly it's this large heatsink with this transistor. That is the pass resistor, so this is bleeding off all that extra voltage along with this resistor. So this whole side of the TV will get really hot, and it's one of the reasons why this set uses up 95 watts, I think it said on the back sticker. Looks like we have a Hitachi branded CRT, so yep, good quality CRT, Japanese made. These are the tuners, the VHF tuner, the UHF tuner. Obviously, these do need to work if we're gonna try to use this set, and that's because this thing does not have a composite video input, so we're gonna need to feed a video signal into the tuner. Over here, we have the flyback, and we have probably something like a tripler. This component that is pretty bulky, actually, almost certainly takes the voltage from the flyback, say it's 7,000 volts, triples it, so you end up at like 24,000 volts, which is more normal for a 13-inch set like this, or 21,000, something like that. So it takes a lot of the strain off the windings of the flyback. The higher the potential energy of the flyback, the more likely those windings are to fail. But of course, that means that the tripler can fail, so I think these were failure points on sets, and you had to swap these out. There is a good amount of soot over in this area, which implies this thing does have a good amount of runtime. The soot is attracted to the high voltage, and it's just one of the telltale signs that you can see if a thing has been operating a long time, a high voltage CRT like this. This component here is most likely the horizontal output transistor, so this is what drives the flyback. It's a relatively high stress part, and this is an NEC C1875. I'll have to look that up to see if it is actually that. There is a boatload of dust in this set. You just see it's super dusty, especially in the high voltage area, but it's kind of dusty everywhere. And I think a lot of the dust just fell in the vents through the back of the TV while this thing was just sitting. And you can really make that out on these components. So just look at that, super dusty. But that shouldn't affect the operation of the set. I think what I am gonna do before I attempt to power on this TV is clean up around the high voltage anode connection on the CRT. It's possible that the dust can facilitate some arcing between the high voltage anode and say the ground, which is this part of the CRT. And the same goes for down on the flyback. So I'm just gonna give this thing a little bit of a clean. And remember, I haven't used this set in years. I mean, I don't even know when the last time it was used. It could be 20 years, but I haven't personally used it in 2 years. So this is safe to touch as it is here. So I'm just gonna use some Windex on a paper towel, and you'll see all the soot that comes off of this. Loads and loads of it. I mean, look at that. Now, incidentally, it's entirely possible that this set is completely worn out. Like, it might have just been used and used and used and may not work very well anymore. And that's fine, because that means it was used for its intended purpose. I really just like the way this set looks, this old sort of vintage look, and I don't have any TVs like this in the collection, or monitors for that matter, that look like this, and there's something cool about it. It'd be nice if this set had composite video. That would just make it a whole lot easier to use, but using it with an RF modulator is not that difficult. I have several small RF modulators plus VCRs, and that type of thing would work perfectly with this TV set. And it goes without saying, something like a Commodore 64 has RF output as well, so we could actually just use it with that directly on the RF output. You might be wondering, when I mentioned that the metal parts of the set, like down here on the chassis, could become live. Well, how could there be some screws that were exposed on the back? Wouldn't those be dangerous to touch? The rest of this set is entirely plastic. Every part of it, the knobs on the front, everything is plastic. And the reason why is because this is a hot chassis set and it could be dangerous. So how could there be metal screws on the back? Wouldn't that be dangerous? Well, it's not, because where these wires, these are the inputs to the tuner, they don't go straight into the tuner. There's actually a little isolation transformer, a matching transformer that basically takes these RF signals and runs them through a transformer, because they are AC signals, and then that goes into the tuner. So these are not directly connected to anything on the set. We could use a multimeter and tone this out to any of the metal parts, and none of these would be connected, and that's how it can be safe. Now, I would like to try to get this high voltage anode cap off, but the kind of, I don't know, little container area for the handle is in the way. It's basically touching the anode cap. That seems kind of weird and kind of sketchy. But this is actually kind of stuck on here as well. Okay, I don't know. It's going to be fine. There's a little bit of dust on the backside still. I don't think that's going to cause any kind of issue. I'll just try to get back there with this damp cloth. Now, there's one thing I want to talk about now that I've cleaned this up a little bit. Do you notice how through the glass, you can actually see kind of a brown stripy, striated look to it? I've kind of found that as a CRT wears from excessive use, the emissive materials on the cathode burn off and they kind of end up on the inside of the CRT. And I've had some of these that are super worn out and they kind of get these markings through this clear part. It's not going to be over here where there's this dag paint. It's just on the clear glass. You can kind of see this brown stuff. I'm not sure if that's a telltale sign. It might only be for certain manufacturers, but I've definitely seen it where I had two very similar CRTs, same manufacturer, one massively worn out, and you kind of had this brown look to it, while the other one that wasn't worn out, you could see that this was painted on the inside, because I think there's a paint similar to this, but on the inside. But I think what happens is it changes color maybe from use. I'm not 100% sure. I just want to point that out that this has that. I'm taking the opportunity while this is not charged up with any kind of voltage, just feel if the fine tuning is working on the VHF tuner. And I realize now that I made a mistake. The knob or the ring on the front to turn the fine tuning, you have to push it in and then it makes contact. And I know that's working because I can feel its input into the tuner. And when I push it, I can now feel that that's turning. And if I leave it out and I turn it, it doesn't really turn the fine tuning anymore. There's like kind of a clutch mechanism, it feels like. So you push it in and now it's actually turning the input into the tuner, which is perfect. And as I turn the front knob, it changes, or you can see this shaft moving. Okay, we're getting pretty close to turning this on. First thing I'm gonna do real quick is I'm just gonna check the fuse. The fuse is good. That indicates that this thing wasn't retired with a fault that blew the fuse. I just wanna make sure that the ground leads that go between, say, the CRT and the neck board and the main PCB are connected, so that one looks good. This wire right there is the CRT ground. It goes to the DAG, and that is firmly connected there. That 3-position capacitor I talked about is actually made by Sampo, and the values for each of the components inside is marked on the side. So that's good. One nice thing about this as well is it does not smell like a smoker ever used this set. It smells sort of, I don't know, like potpourri almost, sort of a nice herbal smell to it. So whoever owned this thing took good care of it. I mean, it's dusty inside, but it was not in a stinky house. Like, it's not musty, and it's also not smoky inside. So that just means it was kept indoors and not in a damp place, which is excellent. That means things like the windings on the yoke and the tripler and the flyback are more likely to work and not be moisture damaged. Oh, by the way, as well, when related to the hot chassis-ness of this set, you might also be saying, hey, there's a headphone jack on the front. How can you use that safely? Well, it looks like the speaker and the headphone jack, which are connected together. So when you plug something into the headphone jack, you're just gonna disable the speaker, and it's the same amplification circuit. It goes through a transformer. There's a transformer on the board right here. I can see the white and black wires that go to the front. So it is isolated as well. And that's what makes that headphone jack safe to use on a hot chassis set like this. For safety, I'm going to be using an isolation transformer to power this TV, which I have the TV currently plugged into this, and the transformer is plugged into this power strip, which is currently off, but it is in the wall. So when I flip this power switch, the TV will then have 120 volts mains going into it, 122 or so, which is at my house. I'm not going to bother reforming any of the capacitors or any of that stuff on here. I don't think it's a good idea to run these sets at some kind of a low voltage. That's obviously something you should do for tube-based sets where they have vacuum tubes. But transistorized sets like this, you shouldn't really run them at lower than their B+ voltage. So I think 115 or so is probably the minimum that you should send into one of these sets, or it's just going to start stressing out components inside. That is my opinion, though. Other people may think otherwise, but that's what I'm going to do in this situation. So we're going to be recording the back of the set when I turn this thing on. In fact, power switch is in, so if I turn the switch on, nothing should happen. Yep, nothing happened, except I can hear the hum of the transformer. And I put a mirror here so you can just make out the CRT on the front. That gray is the CRT, so if you see light there, some static, then it's working. So are we ready for this? I have my hand on the power switch. 3, 2, 1. Okay, this volume knob is scratchy, but there is high voltage. I'm watching for a line. It freaking works. It just freaking works. Unbelievable, but not surprised in the least. Not even a little bit. All right, I'm gonna turn this off. I'll just turn it off at the switch here. Wow, that's freaking awesome. That really is awesome. I am not surprised whatsoever. Okay, I think what I'm gonna go do is I'm gonna slide the chassis back into the case. I'm gonna take this outside. I'm gonna hit it with the compressed air just to try to clean this thing out a little bit, because it's, yeah, it's looking a little rough in here. This actually gives me the opportunity to test out my little compressed air duster thing, this battery powered one. Not a sponsor, I'm not even sure who makes this. I got it from Amazon after reading some reviews and looking at some review videos of these types of things. It's pretty good. I like it. I wish the nozzle were a little smaller with like a longer stick so I could get in there and really clean stuff. But instead of using compressed air, I like this thing. But I also have a mains powered version, which I've shown on the channel a bunch of times, plus an actual air compressor outside. So I'm gonna go clean this up a little bit so we can take a look a bit closer at the motherboard and, well, maybe see some of the components, because they're all covered in dust. Well, I'm noticing I'm having some issues with the audio on my camera. I hope it's working okay. Okay, well, anyways, the wireless or battery powered duster worked wonderfully. That's all I used, and it just completely blew away the dust on this thing very easily. So I like that thing. When it comes to buying one of those, I don't even see the model number on it, so just look for one that looks exactly the same as that. That's probably the best thing to do. What we really need to do now is run this thing for a little while and just see if it looks good from the front. And then I need to clip on an RF signal, and we need to see if the tuner is working, and if so, feed an image into this thing. All right, the power switch is still out, and I'm going to turn on the power. 3, 2, 1. have the volume turned down. Get my finger ready to turn it off quickly. Looks okay. Let's see about the brightness control. That really doesn't seem to do anything at all. How about the picture control? That one at least seems to work. How about the tuner? Oh yeah, seems to do something. Looks pretty sharp. I can make out scan lines, so that's from a focus standpoint, that's excellent. And there's the speaker. That beat sounds fine as well. The potentiometer's a little bad on the volume control there. Yeah, that definitely needs to be cleaned. I wouldn't say it's unusual if you've turned on a TV that hasn't been used in a long time, that if it's kind of dim, it'll actually brighten up just as the cathode and the emissive material inside the CRT kind of wakes up. It's actually kind of waking up after a long slumber. At least I've found that usually with black and white sets, but sometimes with color sets as well. And I have to say, this thing's just sitting here, and it does seem to be even brightening up. I keep turning down the picture control. I mean, that's minimum. That's as low as it can go. And let's see, color, that doesn't do anything. There's no color, obviously, right now. Well, you know what's odd is the brightness control seems to work now. Maybe I was adjusting the wrong control a second ago. It's the middle one. But that works as expected. Yeah, that should make the picture completely blank out. Is there a detent? Yes, there is a center detent, which is right there. And that's with the picture all the way down. I can still see the image, so that's good. Now with the picture, oh yeah, I mean, this CRT has life in it. I was thinking maybe it was really worn out based on those brown marks I could see there. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's been running for a few minutes. Let's power this off. I want to see if any of the electrolytic caps are warm. So I'm on that big filter cap, the one that's got 3 things inside of it. Not even warm at all. Completely cold to the touch. I'm just going to feel around the other electrolytics. This one's a little bit warm right here, but it is around these heat sinks, which are slightly warm. Well, there's a big power resistor actually right there, and that is hot. So that is a candidate capacitor. Let me get a little closer in so you can see what I'm talking about. That's a candidate capacitor for replacement. Anytime they're right near hot components, so this capacitor here is right next to this hot power resistor. So that one might be good to replace just because it's probably dried out potentially. But the large capacitor there, not even slightly warm, which is great. So I'm just going to feel around the rest of these caps, little ones here, see if any of them are oddly hot. Everything seems pretty cool to the touch. This big power resistor, that's warm. What is that? 30-watt power resistor? Yeah, I mean, it's not burning hot though, so that's a good thing. This heatsink, barely warm. This heatsink, barely warm. Just trying to see where all the other electrolytics are. They're just little tiny ones, and the little tiny ones aren't going to be high voltage generally, so I think they're going to be fine if they're not blown up already, and they're not. This thing was running without any issue. Yeah, it's looking good. Honestly, this is the only cap that I say is a candidate for swapping just because of its proximity to hot things. There's a couple more tiny caps right next to another power resistor, and it's warm, but it's actually not burning hot, the power resistor that is. And therefore the caps that are right near it, probably okay. Okay, yeah, this is the only one I even suspect slightly. Sorry, this one, that one there. I have to say, like on the neck board, I don't even see any electrolytic caps on here. Might be one. It uses polymer caps and disc capacitors. Yeah, that's good. Those ones don't fail. I think the polymer caps can get slightly leaky over time. This is a polymer cap right here, this red thing. But generally are pretty good, pretty safe. I am honestly not surprised in the least that this cheap TV from 1979 just freaking works. It just freaking works. Okay, we don't know fully if it's working because obviously I have not tested the color decoding. We're gonna have to hook up a source for that. Can I squirt some Deoxit into the potentiometer for the volume control? I think I can, it's right there. I'm going to use some of this QD electric cleaner. I'm just going to get some rubber gloves first before I use this. I'm not too sure if I was actually getting that into the pot. I may need to kind of disassemble the little board. I think there's a few screws that hold it on, but it's possible I got to remove the whole tuner assembly. I don't really feel like doing that, so let's just see if that did the trick. Yep, that did the trick. No more scratchiness on the on that pot. Awesome. For testing the TV's RF input, I'm going to use my VG91. This is basically a super duper expensive RF modulator and test pattern generator. A lovely viewer made me a nice cable to use with this. Instead of using a bunch of adapters on the BNC, it goes from BNC to F connector, and then I can use a Balun or Balun to convert the 75 ohm output this thing has to 300 ohms, which is what this TV needs on its input. So I have this clamp connector, which normally allows me to clip right onto those screws. But for now, I'm just going to remove this clamp, and then I could just put these little spade connectors directly into the tuner input. Okay, so it's not the best connection in the world, but I have the 300 ohm matching transformer just plugged into those RF connections, and I use the one with the red stripe on it. Who knows if that's the right one? We'll figure that out in a second. All right, I'm gonna turn the TV on. Yeah, there's these like bars that are happening. Oh, there we go. So I'm on channel 4 now, and it looks perfect. All right, there we have color decoding, obviously. It's not great. This knob is also scratchy, this pot. Where's color? Color's here. Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's looking good. It's looking really good. There's the test tone, looks good. Picture control is working. I'd say the color balances out a little bit on the set, so that's the RGB bias and drive controls on the back. Brightness control, so it's in the detent position. Vertical holds, that's fine. And this is the color control. If I turn the color all the way down, I can see now that the grayscale's out a little bit. It may not look that way in the camera, but it's looking a little on the yellowish side. So that means the blue is just a little bit weaker than it should be. Let me turn down the RF level. Okay, yeah, well, it gets staticky, but look at the way I have it hooked up. So considering that, not too bad. But on full level, there's a little bit of static in there, but it's not too bad. Crosshatch, it's a little bit soft, but I can see the scan lines without any issue. Yeah, scan lines are good, so focus is good on the set. This is just RF response that's a bit weak, simply because it's RF. And probably it's not the best tuner or whatever on this set. Circle square, I mean, look at that. Linearity, freaking great. Even the centering, overscan, it all looks really good. I am kind of blown away, to be honest, by this set. You can actually get it to peak a little bit by just adjusting the fine tuning. So this gets a little brighter, but I think that introduces, yeah, you get some of these bars. You gotta tune those out. Yeah, I mean, linearity, focus, everything, it's just awesome. Really, really looks good on this set. What can I say? It's just the white balance that we have to adjust a little bit just to dial up the blue. I like cooler color temperatures, and this is a little bit on the yellow side. So I took a picture of that sticker that was on the back of the case that just shows all the locations of various components in the TV. Let's just see what we see. So chassis CS13A, VHF, UHF tuner that goes onto the front panel. There's that ACT switch, which I noticed when I pushed it, just seems to affect the amount of color. Not the tint, but just the color saturation. And it doesn't disable the front switch entirely, just makes the front switch work less. Exposed through the front of the set, color, brightness, and vertical hold. And then we have a potentiometer for the RF AGC, or automatic gain control. There's a potentiometer called APC, automatic picture control, I'm imagining. Perhaps there's something to do with automatically limiting the brightness of the screen so you don't overdrive it. R812 is labeled as color preset, so maybe this is like a sub color control. Vertical linearity, vertical size, horizontal hold, there is no extra control on that extra hole we saw in the back of the case. Up at the top, we have another potentiometer for sub brightness. We have 120 volts adjustment, that's R711. My assumption is this is the same thing as the B plus adjustment, and I guess this TV ran on 160 volts. Maybe it just runs on 120 volts. If you're new to televisions and you're poking around in this set, I would not adjust this potentiometer, this R711, or anytime you see another one that says B+, I would just leave that alone. Unless you have the service manual that will tell you exactly what the B+ voltage should be, I wouldn't touch this. Now, there is a possibility that this is referencing the mains input voltage on this set, which is labeled as 120 volts as well, not 117, which is kind of typical for stuff from the 70s. So again, we can't really make an assumption that the B+ of this TV is actually 120 volts. I still think it's about 160. Notice this component T601 is labeled as horizontal oscillator. My assumption is the T designator has to do with the transformer, because T603 horizontal output, that's the flyback. So that's probably what's connecting whatever the horizontal oscillator is on this set. It's probably an IC drive into the horizontal output transistor. which if we scroll over here, there it is, Q603 horizontal output. So that is the package on a little heatsink on the back. There's that focus control, which is on the tripler. And lastly, we have what's on the neck board. We have green drive, blue drive. The red drive is physically set with a resistor, although a lot of times there's pads for a potentiometer. You can actually install one if you want to control the red drive as well. We have the bias controls for red, green, and blue, and the screen controls. That's the grid control that controls the overall brightness of the screen via manipulating one of the grids in the back of the CRT. And that's all we can really learn from this PDF. I'm going to upload this to archive.org just in case anyone loses this or doesn't have it in the back of their TV, and maybe this will help them fix it. Incidentally, it does appear that Sam's PhotoFax does have the service manual for this set. So chassis 13A, and it's 22 bucks. And we can see the Sam's document number applies to these models 7513 and 7613. This is a 7713. Looking at the thumbnail, we can tell this looks very similar to the set, although maybe there's a remote control variant. Is this a version with a wireless remote control? I did a quick search for Sampo TVs, and take a look at this. Here's the TV that we have right here, the 7713. It does work as well, even though it's missing one of the knobs. But would you look at this? Model number 7613 is a remote set. Oh, that's so cool. So it's the same chassis. It's just the tuner has been replaced with one of these voltage control tuners, and it looks like they moved the other controls down to the front bottom edge of the set. Ah, that's cool, and a remote control. I absolutely love it. So there it is, 1979 when this was manufactured, but model 7613. And look, it still freaking works. Sampo making super reliable stuff. The rest of the TV looks similar, but look, it also has 75 ohm input as well, so other slight changes. And you know what? You might have heard of Sampo from this television, which was being offered up in 1984 on The Price is Right, a TV game show in the US. Yep, it was a 3-screen TV with a color TV in the middle and 2 small black and white TVs sort of shoehorned in to the chassis. I don't think there was any real connection between these TVs and the large 13-inch television, or is that a 19-inch? I think it's a 19-inch TV, but that is so cool. Sampo, yep, making awesome stuff. These sets go for a lot of money these days because, of course, the whole premise is just odd and unusual, but look at that coolness. And there we are, a little minor tweaking on the bias controls, and the set is looking so much better when it comes to the color balance, at least. I took a look at the footage I shot before I made the adjustments, and you really couldn't tell in the camera that this particular scale here actually was sort of yellowish. Anyways, after adjustments, it's looking much better now. And we happen to know what the bias controls are based on that sticker that was on the back of the case, but the lower 3 controls over on the right side, when I'm looking from the front towards the back of the set, are the bias controls, and those are what I tweaked to adjust the color balance. All right, there it is. The TV is all back together. I cleaned it up a little bit further, and it's working absolutely flawlessly. One of my only minor gripes about this TV is that the internal speaker is small, so it doesn't have the fullest of sound, but it's still clear enough. And of course, being, well, one of these TVs from the late 70s, it still can get pretty loud when you crank up the volume. It's just that if the physical speaker were bigger, it'd sound a little bit better, but there's just not a lot of room on the front of this set. Hooked up to the VCR, the signal is perfect. There's no interference or static. I'm currently on channel 3, and looks flawless. Now, I suppose one of the only negatives about this set is that if you have any kind of ambient light shining on the screen, as you can see, it washes out the picture. I have the picture or the white level control turned down just to not overdrive the CRT. And there's plenty of brightness in this old set still. It's just the contrast ratio when the lights are on, it gets washed out a little bit. In the 80s, you started seeing sets with tinted regular glass on top of the CRT mounted here, kind of had that 80s look to it. But in the 2000s, the actual glass on the CRT itself was actually tinted, and maybe the phosphor formulation was changed as well. That would give the picture a nicer black background, which would enhance the contrast ratio, with probably giving up a little bit of the overall image intensity on the bright side, but it was probably worthwhile trade-off just to get the better contrast ratio. Now I can hear it now, people watching this video are asking about composite video input, and one potential solution for getting composite inputs on a set like this would be to use one of these replacement boards. That would just do away with the tuners entirely, and of course replace the entire main board with something that has composite video inputs, S-video, and component inputs. If you don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to this replacement CRT chassis, I have plenty of videos on this where I have upgraded old sets with this, including a Commodore 1702. And the benefit is, of course, this makes it a remote set, and it gives it PAL, CCAM, and NTSC compatibility. And I'm pretty sure that this would just work perfectly plugged into the deflection yoke on this set, and of course the speaker and everything else. So this should totally work. Not to mention the main PCB that's in this set is about the same size as this entire PCB. So I'm pretty sure that this would just mount inside here with no fuss. It would be very easy to do. So I really kind of like this set as it is with this RF tuner, but I may end up doing the swap anyway, since I do have this spare board, and it would be pretty cool to have an old set like this that has a carry handle on top that also has composite video input, which would make it really easy to hook up to, well, retro computers and game consoles. Obviously I could use a VCR or an RF modulator to do that as well, but you would just get even higher resolution, just crisper text if you did it through composite video. So I think that's going to be it for this video. It's not much more to do. This TV just freaking worked perfectly. I reflowed those solder joints on the connectors just as a preventative measure, but I didn't change any of the capacitors. I didn't do anything. This thing just worked. It needed a slight tune-up when it came to the bias controls just to give it the color balance that I personally like. But I mean, this thing it's just freaking working perfectly. So if you enjoyed this video on the Sampo 7713, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. All the usual YouTube junk, subscribe, etc., etc. And thanks to my patrons and members, they make it possible to do this full time. Their names are scrolling beside the screen. And if you want to become a supporter, you can do so at the link in the description below. It makes it possible I do this full time. And that is gonna be that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.